The World Series between the Yankees and Dodgers this year featured a combined payroll of $550 million between both teams. If you add the 2024 payrolls of the Athletics, Pirates, Rays, Marlins, Tigers, and Reds all together, you'd still be $19 million short of that $550 million mark. That's 6 teams worth of payroll right there. That's less than 2 of the top teams. There seems to be a large gap between the small market teams like the Rays and Pirates and the huge markets in LA and New York. This gap shouldn't come as a huge surprise to many of you, as this has been talked about time and time again for years across Major League Baseball. The Yankees and Dodgers just buy out all the good players and only win games that way. Major League Baseball is the only North American sport that does not have a salary cap. Does MLB need a salary cap? Many fans seem to think so. But this question is a lot more complicated than you might think, and unfortunately a salary cap in MLB is very unlikely, if not impossible. There are many layers to this problem, but to better understand it, we need to start at the root of this problem, the gap. But before we get into that, I want to thank today's video sponsor, and that's Southern New Hampshire University. Are you stuck at a job that you don't enjoy? Maybe you've been at a company for a while or a job for a while that just doesn't suit you. Maybe you're looking for a fresh start in the sports industry. That is where SNHU's sports management degree comes in. With this degree, SNHU will help you prepare for job opportunities in a career in sports. This degree offers 24/7 online access, so you can go to class wherever and whenever it is most convenient. SNHU is also radically affordable. Their online tuition rates are some of the lowest in the nation. SNHU was voted one of the country's most innovative universities by U.S. News and World Report. The courses are taught by faculty with real-world experience, so you will have plenty of opportunities to connect with people in the industry. You'll also be able to tap in with SNHU graduates who are already working in sports-related organizations. Just click the link in the description, snhu.edu/Walytics, enter your information, and you can begin your application today. To illustrate this gap that we're talking about, take a look at this graph that has every team's payroll from the 2024 season. All the way on the right are the big spenders in the Mets, Yankees, Astros, Phillies, Dodgers, and so on. On the left-hand side, you have the lighter spenders in the A's, Pirates, Rays, you know the teams. This graph takes on a pretty steep slope for what is ideally supposed to be about an even playing field for all 30 teams. This steep slope is something that fans often complain about. If you sum up the money from the players on the top 10 teams, you get nearly $2.5 billion amongst just those 10 teams. If you do the same for the bottom 10, you get a much more modest $967 million. The middle 10 teams have around $1.55 billion allocated to players. Even this group has a large difference from the bottom 10. Just for reference, the Dodgers recently signed Shohei Ohtani to a 10-year, $700 million contract, which is nearly the same as the bottom 10 payrolls combined. That, of course, is the largest contract in Dodgers history. Let's compare that to the largest contract in athletics history, Eric Chavez, who signed a 6-year, $66 million deal in 2004. If we stack 10 Eric Chavezes on top of each other, we still won't get to Shohei. Yeah, that's a pretty big gap. Looking at other major professional sports in the United States, they don't seem to have this problem. The NFL, in comparison, has a much more gradual, almost no slope compared to the MLB graph. This is even more clear when you look at the bottom third teams compared to the top third teams in terms of spending. There's a difference of just $128 million, which is an average of around $13 million per team, much smaller than the gap in the MLB graph, which was well over $1 billion. Another thing to note about the NFL is that we don't see the same teams at the bottom every year or the same teams at the top every year. This list is much more fluid, and small market teams don't exist in the NFL. The other major league in the US, the NBA, is much more similar to the NFL than it is to Major League Baseball. The slope of the payrolls is somewhat in between the two other leagues we talked about. The gap between the top 10 teams and the bottom 10 teams is only $379 million. It's pretty clear that Major League Baseball has a unique problem on its hands compared to the other two most popular sports in the country. And is that because of the salary cap? Well, there's some other differences between the leagues. The NFL, for example, has a national coverage or regional coverage for every game, unlike MLB, where nearly all of a team's games are on the local market only. MLB teams are much more dependent on the local market that they're in. The payroll that a team spends is dependent on a lot of different things, but one thing's for certain, the larger markets consistently have larger payrolls and vice versa for the smaller markets. This, of course, makes sense logically, and the numbers back it up. This graph clearly shows that higher market sizes are associated with higher payrolls. There are other factors like owners' willingness to spend, which is the one people often talk about, and the current state of the team, but none are bigger than the market size of the city that the team is in. These factors lead to this huge gap. Major League Baseball does have some measures in place to attempt to decrease this gap, the biggest one being the luxury tax threshold. This is a dollar amount that teams are allowed to go over, but every dollar past that limit will be taxed. Essentially, teams will spend extra money to go over this threshold. Obviously, this isn't a perfect solution because the big market teams that this threshold is targeting have a ton of money, and some of them don't really care about paying that extra tax to go over the threshold. It's not useless though. There's been a lot of evidence that it deters teams from overspending. They also have things like the draft lottery and revenue sharing that help small market teams get a step up without spending more money. These attempts have not satisfied the bulk of MLB's fan base, as most of them are asking the same question: where's the salary cap? There are two different proposals that you'll see people spew out online often, those two being implementing a salary cap or a salary floor. A salary floor is similar to a salary cap, except it's a number that teams must reach in their payroll. They're not allowed to spend under that amount. This would force small market owners to spend more money on their players. This chart represents the fans' biggest issues with the owners. They have the money, they have the revenue, but some of them just aren't spending an appropriate portion on the players. Okay, well, we have our solution. Just use a salary floor. It will solve all our problems. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. At the end of the day, Major League Baseball is a business. It's a business where billions of dollars are involved. Players make up what's essentially their own economy. Every type of player has a certain demand, and there are only so many of those types of players. Players like Ohtani and Judge are in extremely high demand. Almost every team would want to have them on their team, but the supply of these types of players is very low. This means that their market price is going to be astronomically high. Other players are going to have much lower market prices, and some will be in between. There are essentially no limits to this market, as teams will spend market price to get these players. The players love this because they are getting paid what they deserve. Play well, get paid well. If you were to implement a salary cap, these players up here would not get their market price, as teams would be much less willing to give out contracts like that with a hard salary cap. You would see these contracts drop a little as teams do not have unlimited spending anymore. This is just one of the issues that implementing a salary cap would cause. A salary floor, though, players would be mostly for. That would force teams to spend more money on players in order to reach the salary floor, and players down here would be affected more. Okay, once again, this sounds like a solution, a salary floor. What are we waiting for, MLB? Well, let me paint you a little picture. Imagine on one side there's John Fisher, owner of the former Oakland A's, and he's representing the owners. I picked him for a reason. He's well known to be one of the cheapest and selfish owners in the league. Imagine on the other side is the Players Association, a union that represents the players and fights to get the best conditions for them. Fisher says to the Players Association, "I want a salary cap. The Dodgers and Yankees are spending too much money, and it's unfair for teams like mine who don't have that kind of money." The Players Association responds by saying, "No, that would decrease the overall pool of money available to the players, thus decreasing the average pay that the players will get. Also, great players like Ohtani and Judge will not be getting paid what they're actually worth on the market. The salary cap will limit how much teams can spend on those kinds of players." The Players Association offers the enticing counter to Fisher in a salary floor. It will increase the players' salaries. Fisher absolutely hates this idea. "You mean you're going to force me to spend my money?" Yeah, that's not happening. Now, instead of coming to a compromise and employing both a cap and floor, none of them get imposed. Both sides see the negatives outweighing the benefits. That leads us to the relatively simple answer to this question. The salary cap or salary floor is just not going to happen. Plus, if you want evidence that spending equals winning and not spending equals losing, 2024 is about as bad of a year as you could use for evidence. 5 of the teams that made the playoffs in 2024 had a payroll ranked 20th or lower. The Royals, Brewers, Orioles, Guardians, and Tigers all had great seasons despite not having significantly high payrolls. If you look at the top 14 teams in terms of payroll this year, only 6 of them made the playoffs. It's obviously not impossible to win with a small payroll, and it actually has been fairly common recently. The Diamondbacks made it to the World Series in 2023 with a bottom 10 payroll. So, if there was a time to implement some sort of salary cap or salary floor in Major League Baseball, I don't think now is the right time to strike. Small market teams are having success. If you take a look at this graph that relates payroll to winning percentage, you can see there's a general upwards trend which you would expect. But as we mentioned before, there are plenty of low payroll teams that performed well. There are also plenty of high payroll teams that didn't perform great. The number one thing that lets these teams compete is the 6 years of control that a team gets when they develop their own players. When a team calls up a player for the first time, their service time clock starts. For their first 3 years, they get paid pretty cheap on a minimum contract. The next 3 years are arbitration, which is when a player can only negotiate with their current team, meaning they still aren't going to get paid a lot of money. This allows teams like the Orioles to have Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson playing for next to nothing. Small market teams that are constantly developing talent like the Rays, Guardians, and Brewers have been good the past few years. Yes, it might be frustrating to watch the two payroll giants go at it in the World Series, but I think the league is a lot more competitive than most people think. In the end, this isn't a story with a clean-cut solution. Major League Baseball has unique challenges when it comes to payroll disparities, largely driven by the differences in market sizes and revenue streams. The idea of a salary cap or floor sounds simple on paper, but becomes much more complex when we consider the interests of both the owners and players. For every fan who feels the gap between teams is too wide, there's another pointing to examples of small market teams who've succeeded without massive spending. Baseball isn't just about money, it's about strategy, it's about development, and a little bit of luck. So while the payroll gap remains a hot topic, it's clear that spending doesn't guarantee success, nor does a smaller budget necessarily mean a losing season. Yes, a salary cap and floor would make the league more competitive, but unfortunately, it's just not going to happen. So I think it's time to stop wasting energy complaining about this topic and just enjoy the game the way it is today. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you enjoyed. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.